Before we descend into the shadows of Damascus, into a world where a whisper can end a life, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. We are uncovering the history that governments try to burn. Hit the notification bell so you are the first to know when the next file is declassified. Now let's go back to 1983. The most terrifying sound in the headquarters of the Mossad, located on the northern edge of Tel Aviv, is not the siren of an incoming attack. It is not the shouting of commanders or the ringing of secure telephones. The most terrifying sound is the static hiss of a radio channel that should be active, but isn't. It is the silence of a dead drop that remains full. It is the absence of a signal. In the winter of 1983, that silence was deafening. Avner, a senior case officer for the Humid Division, Human Intelligence, sat in a small, windowless room illuminated only by the green glow of a computer terminal and the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. He was staring at a calendar. It had been 14 days since Icarus had made contact. Icarus was the operational codename for Colonel Nabil al-Hassan, a high-ranking logistics officer within the Syrian Army's 4th Armored Division. For 3 years, Nabil had been the crown jewel of Israeli intelligence in Syria. He wasn't a man who sold secrets for money. He didn't care for Swiss bank accounts or luxury apartments in Paris. Nabil was a man driven by a profound melancholic patriotism. He believed that the regime of Hafez al-Assad was driving his beloved Syria into a ruinous, Soviet-backed abyss. He believed that by leaking information about advanced missile deployments to Israel, he was maintaining a balance of power that would prevent a war that would destroy Damascus. He was a man of principle, and men of principle are the hardest to break, but the easiest to kill. "Nothing?" asked the division chief, stepping into the room. He held a styrofoam cup of coffee, the steam rising in the cold air conditioning. "Nothing," Avner replied, rubbing his eyes. He missed the window for the burst transmission on the 12th. He didn't show up for the brush pass in the Souk al-Hamidiyah on the 15th. And the emergency signal, the chalk mark on the lamppost in the Christian quarter, hasn't appeared. "Maybe he's gone to ground," the chief said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The Mukhabarat is tightening the screws. Maybe he's just being careful." "Nabil is a clock," Avner said quietly. "If he stops ticking, it's because someone smashed the gears." The silence in the room deepened. In the world of intelligence, silence usually meant one of two things. The asset had defected and was running, or the asset had been taken. And in Syria, being taken was a fate that made death look like a mercy. The Syrian intelligence services, the Mukhabarat, were legendary for their brutality. They didn't just interrogate, they dismantled people. "We need to know, Avner," the chief said, placing the coffee on the table. "Icarus holds the keys to the entire northern ballistic missile grid. If he has been compromised, we have to assume they know what he told us. We have to assume they are feeding us lies through his channels, or worse, that they are rolling up the entire network." "I'm going in," Avner said. It wasn't a question. "You can't go to Damascus. You're too senior. If they catch you—" "I'm not going as myself," Avner cut him off. "And I'm not going alone. We need to find him. If he's alive, we extract him. If he's dead, we need to confirm it so we can burn the network and save the others. But I have a feeling he's waiting for us." Avner stood up, grabbing his jacket. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to step into a nightmare that would haunt the agency's corridors for decades. He was about to find out exactly what happened when a man of principle falls into the hands of men with none. To understand the gravity of the situation, one must understand the year 1983 in the Levant. The region was a powder keg. Israel was bogged down in Lebanon, fighting a complex war against militias and Syrian proxies. The Cold War was freezing over. The Soviet Union was pumping billions of dollars of hardware into Syria, turning the country into a fortress of anti-aircraft batteries and Scud missiles. Colonel Nabil al-Hassan had been the man who provided the map to that fortress. Avner had recruited him in London 3 years prior. It had been a long-game recruitment. Avner, posing as a Canadian academic specializing in Middle Eastern history, had accidentally met Nabil at a symposium. They had bonded over coffee and a shared appreciation for ancient history, specifically the tragedies of leaders who led their people to ruin. It took 6 months before the first piece of intelligence changed hands. Now, sitting in a safe house in Cyprus, preparing for the jump into the lion's den, Avner replayed every interaction he had ever had with Nabil. He was looking for the flaw. The slip. "The passport is ready," said a voice from the doorway. It was Yael, a specialist from the Mossad unit, the division responsible for special operations and sabotage. She was young, sharp-featured, with eyes that assessed threats faster than a computer. She tossed a dark blue passport onto the table. "You are now Georgi Dimitrov, a Bulgarian agricultural machinery consultant. Syria loves the Eastern Bloc right now. It's the best cover." Avner picked up the document. The texture was perfect. The stamps were aged correctly. "And the team?" "3 of us," Yael said. "Myself, you, and Eitan. Eitan is already in Damascus. He's been operating under the cover of a UN observer's driver for 2 months. He's our eyes on the ground." "Has Eitan heard anything about Nabil?" "Rumors," Yael said, sitting down across from him. "The officers' club in Damascus is whispering. They say a high-ranking traitor was discovered. They say General Saraf took personal interest in the case." Avner's blood ran cold. General Saraf, the head of Palestine Branch 235, one of the most feared internal security units in Syria. Saraf was a man who prided himself on artistic interrogations. He didn't just want information. He wanted to destroy the soul of the traitor. "If Saraf has him," Avner whispered, "then Nabil is in hell. We have a lead on the location," Yael continued, her voice professional but tight. "We thought they would take him to the Mossad military prison. That's standard for officers. But Eitan tracked a convoy of unmarked Mukhabarat vehicles 3 nights ago. They didn't go to Mossad. They went to an old French Mandate fortress on the outskirts of the city. A place that doesn't officially exist on the prison roster. A black site," Avner realized. "A place where they take people they want to disappear completely," Yael corrected. "Or people they want to use as an example." The mission parameters were shifting. This wasn't just a reconnaissance mission anymore. If Nabil was in a black site, running out of time wasn't the issue. He was already out of time. The objective was now damage control. "We leave tonight," Avner said. "We fly to Amman, then take the taxi route north to the border. It's risky, but the airport in Damascus is too watched." As he packed his bag, generic clothes, no labels, cash hidden in the lining, a cyanide pill disguised as a heart medication tablet, Avner felt the heavy weight of responsibility. In the intelligence world, you are responsible for the souls you recruit. You convince them to betray their flag, to risk their families, to walk on the razor's edge. And when they fall, it is your hand that pushed them. He had promised Nabil that Israel would protect him. He had promised an extraction plan. But plans are paper, and reality is iron. "We are going to find him, Yael," Avner said, checking the chamber of a suppressed pistol that he wouldn't be able to take with him, leaving it on the table. He would have to acquire weapons locally. "We owe him that." "We owe him a clean death," Yael said brutally. "That's the best we can probably give him now." Avner didn't answer. He feared she was right. Damascus in the 1980s was a city of haunting beauty and suffocating paranoia. The scent of jasmine and roasting coffee wafted through the ancient alleyways of the old city, masking the smell of diesel fumes and the metaphorical stench of fear. Portraits of the president watched from every shop window, every street corner, their eyes seeming to follow passers-by. Avner, now Georgi the Bulgarian, crossed the border from Jordan without incident. The border guards were bored and corrupt. A few packs of Marlboros and a crisp dossier of forged business invitations smoothed the way. He met Eitan in a crowded cafe in the Bab Tuma district. Eitan looked like a local, unshaven, wearing a cheap leather jacket, smoking distinctively pungent local tobacco. They didn't shake hands. They sat at adjacent tables, backs to each other, speaking quietly while pretending to read newspapers. "The fortress is called Al-Kala," Eitan murmured. "It's old stone, thick walls. It was used as a stable during the Ottoman times, then a barracks by the French. Now, it's Saraf's playground." "Security?" Avner asked, sipping bitter tea. "Perimeter walls are 10 feet high, topped with razor wire. 2 guard towers facing the south and east. The main gate is heavy steel, guarded by a squad of 4 men at all times. But the real security is the location. It's isolated. Anyone approaching is seen a mile away." How do we get in? We don't, Aton said. Not through the front. But there is a weakness. The fortress is built over an ancient aqueduct system, Roman era. The Syrians blocked most of it up, but the drainage for the lower levels, where the cells are, still connects to the city's sewage overflow. A sewer crawl, Avner grimaced. Classic. It gets worse, Eitan said. I have a source inside the facility. A janitor. He owes a lot of money to loan sharks in Beirut. I bought his debt. He says they are holding a special guest in the deepest level. He says General Saraf visits every evening at 6 p.m. Is the guest alive? He says the guest screams sometimes, but lately, the screaming has stopped. Avner felt a knot in his stomach. We need to get eyes inside before we move. Can your janitor get a camera in? No, he's too scared. But he can leave a service door unlocked near the drainage output. Tonight, 0200 hours. We have a 20-minute window before the patrol cycles back. It was a suicide mission, infiltrating a Syrian black site based on the word of a janitor and a sewer map. If they were caught, there would be no diplomatic immunity, no prisoner swap. They would simply vanish, just like Nabil. Set it up, Avner said. Yael and I will go in. You stay on the outside with the extraction vehicle. If we aren't out by 0400, you leave. You burn the safe house and you go home. Avner. That's an order, Eitan. We don't lose 3 agents for 1 asset. As night fell over Damascus, the city grew quiet, but it was a tense silence. The silence of a predator waiting in the grass. Avner checked his gear, a flashlight with a red filter, a small specialized camera, lockpicks, and a silenced Makarov pistol Eitan had procured from the black market. He looked at his reflection in the mirror of the safe house bathroom. He didn't look like Georgi the Bulgarian anymore. He looked like a ghost, and tonight he was going to visit the dead. The smell was the first thing that hit them. It was a vile chemical concoction of human waste, industrial runoff, and decay. The Roman aqueduct, once a marvel of engineering, was now a sludge-filled artery beneath the sleeping city. Avner and Yael moved in silence, wading through thigh-deep filth. They wore dark gray mechanics coveralls, their faces blackened with grease. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the thin red beams of their flashlights cutting through the humid, fetid air. 30 meters to the junction, Yael whispered, checking the compass strapped to her wrist. Her voice echoed slightly off the dripping stone arches. They reached the point Eitan had marked on the map. A rusted iron grate blocked the way, but the bars were old and corroded. Avner applied a chemical compound to the hinges, a fast-acting acid agent developed by Mossad's technical directorate. Within minutes, the metal weakened. With a synchronized heave, they pushed the grate inward. It fell with a dull splash. They were in. The ascent was harder, a narrow vertical maintenance shaft lined with slippery ladder rungs. Avner went first, his Makarov drawn. He climbed 40 feet, counting the rungs, until his head brushed against a metal hatch. This was the moment of truth. If the janitor had betrayed them, or if the schedule had changed, a squad of soldiers would be waiting on the other side. Avner listened. He pressed his ear against the cold metal. He heard the hum of a generator, the distant clank of a metal door closing. Footsteps, heavy and booted, fading away. He checked his watch. 0203 hours. He pushed the hatch. It gave way with a groan of unoiled hinges. He froze, waiting for a shout, a shot, an alarm. Nothing. He pulled himself up into a small utility room filled with mops, buckets, and the smell of strong bleach. It was the janitor's closet. They were inside Alcala. Yael scrambled up after him, silently closing the hatch. They stripped off the filth-covered outer layers of their coveralls, revealing clean black tactical gear underneath. Lower level 3, Avner whispered. That's where the high-value cells are. They moved like shadows through the corridors. The prison was built of heavy stone blocks that absorbed sound. The air here was cold and dry, a stark contrast to the sewer. It smelled of old stone and iron. They bypassed a guard station, waiting in the shadows as 2 Syrian soldiers sat smoking and playing cards, their Kalashnikovs leaning against the wall. The lax security was a symptom of arrogance. No one ever broke into a Syrian prison. They reached the stairwell leading down. As they descended, the atmosphere changed. The lighting became dimmer. The air grew stale. There were no more guard stations, only heavy steel doors with small viewing slits. This was Seraph's domain. They reached the end of the corridor. A single heavy wooden door, reinforced with iron bands, stood at the end of the hall. It looked medieval. There was no electronic lock, just a heavy sliding bar. "This is it," Yael signaled. "Cell 1. Avner approached the door. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a physical pain. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of what he was about to see. He was afraid of the guilt. He carefully slid the viewing port open. The light inside the cell was blindingly bright, a common torture technique to disrupt sleep cycles. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the glare. When they did, Avner stopped breathing. He stepped back, his face draining of all color. "What is it?" Yael whispered. Avner didn't speak. He couldn't. He motioned for her to look. Yael stepped up and looked through the slit. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded loud in the quiet corridor. Inside the cell, the far wall was made of rough, unfinished stone, and there, suspended 3 feet off the ground, was Colonel Nabil al-Hassan. He wasn't dead. That was the horror of it. Nabil was shackled to the wall, but not in a way that suggested mere confinement. Heavy industrial bolts had been driven into the masonry, holding thick iron cuffs that gripped his wrists and ankles. His arms were spread wide, his body forming a jagged X against the cold stone. He was stripped to his undergarments. His body was a map of agony. Bruises ranging from black to yellow covered his torso, but it was the method of his restraint that justified the grim rumors. He wasn't just chained. The cuffs were bolted so tight against the wall that he couldn't move a millimeter. He had become a fixture of the room, a part of the architecture. His head hung low, chin resting on his chest. He looked like a broken marionette. "We have to open the door," Avner hissed. Now. The heavy bar on the outside was the only lock, another sign of the utter confidence of his captors. They lifted the bar. It was heavy, scraping loudly against the iron brackets. Avner pushed the door open. They rushed inside. The smell of antiseptic and old blood was overwhelming. "Nabil," Avner whispered, rushing to the man's side. He holstered his weapon and reached up to check for a pulse at the carotid artery. The skin was cold, clammy, but there was a flutter, a weak, thready beat of life. "He's alive," Avner said, his voice trembling. "Yael, check the restraints." Yael examined the bolts. "These are industrial anchors. We can't pick them. We need a wrench, a crowbar, something heavy, or we have to blow them." "We can't use explosives," Avner said. "The concussion in this small space would kill him." Nabil stirred. The sound of their voices, or perhaps the change in air pressure, roused him from his semi-comatose state. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were swollen shut. His lips cracked and dry. Avner?" The voice was a dry rasp, barely a sound. "I'm here, my friend," Avner said, gripping Nabil's shoulder gently. "I'm here. We're getting you out." Nabil tried to shake his head, but the movement caused him to wince in agony. "No. No use. Trap. It's a trap." "What do you mean?" "Seraph," Nabil wheezed. "He knows. You would come. He kept me alive. For bait." The realization hit Avner like a physical blow. The lax security, the janitor who was so easily bought, the open path through the sewers. It wasn't incompetence, it was an invitation. Suddenly the blinding lights in the cell flickered and turned off, plunging them into darkness. Then, the red emergency lights began to stroke, bathing the cell in a blood-colored pulse. A siren began to wail throughout the fortress, a mechanical, grinding shriek. "We've been burned," Yael shouted, raising her weapon towards the door. "Leave me," Nabil groaned. "Kill me, and go." Avner looked at the man nailed to the wall, the man who had given everything for a country that betrayed him, the man Avner had sworn to protect. "I am not leaving you on this wall," Avner said, a cold fury taking over him. "Yael, the door! Brace it!" Yael slammed the heavy wooden door shut and slid the iron bar back into place. They were locked in, but now, instead of being the captors, they were the prisoners. And outside, The sound of heavy boots was thundering down the corridor. The irony was cruel. The heavy door that was meant to keep Nabil in was now the only thing keeping the Syrian army out. "They're coming," Yael said, scanning the small cell for anything they could use. "We have maybe 2 minutes before they bring a battering ram or blow the door." Avner turned back to Nabil. "The bolts, Nabil. How deep are they?" "Deep," Nabil whispered. "Masonry. Anchors." Avner looked at Yael. "The acid. The compound we used on the sewer grate. Do you have any left?" Yael checked her pouch. "Half a tube. It's not enough to melt the bolts, Avner. It takes time." "Put it on the wrist cuffs," Avner commanded. "If we can free his hands, we can drag him. We'll deal with the ankles however we can." Yael applied the paste to the iron cuffs. It sizzled, reacting with the metal, sending up a pungently acrid smoke. Outside, the shouting began. "Open the door. By order of General Seraph, surrender." "Don't answer," Avner said. He pulled a small block of plastic explosive, C4, from his kit. It was the size of a bar of soap. "We're going to make our own exit." "Through the wall?" Yael asked, working frantically on the cuffs. "It's 2 feet of stone." "Not that wall," Avner pointed to the floor. "We are directly above the main drainage line we crawled through. The floor is stone, but the mortar is old. If we blow the floor, we drop back into the sewer. And drop Nabil 10 feet onto concrete? Better than leaving him with Seraph." Thud. The first blow hit the door. The wood splintered but held. Thud. "Hurry!" Avner shouted. He molded the C4 along the grout lines of the stone flagstones in the center of the room, keeping it far enough from Nabil to avoid the blast wave, but close enough to create a hole. He set a 30-second detonator. "The cuffs are weakening!" Yael yelled. She used the butt of her pistol to hammer at the corroded hinge of the left cuff. With a sharp crack, the metal snapped. Nabil's left arm fell limp. She moved to the right. The pounding on the door grew rhythmic. Boom, boom, boom. 10 seconds, Avner warned. Yael smashed the right cuff. It gave way. Nabil slumped forward, held up only by the ankle shackles. "The ankles!" Yael screamed. "We don't have enough acid!" Avner looked at the C4 timer. 5 seconds. He looked at Nabil's ankles, bolted tight to the wall. He looked at Nabil's face. "Do it," Nabil whispered. He knew what had to be done. Avner didn't hesitate. It was the hardest thing he had ever done in a career of hard choices. He pulled a specialized tool from his belt, a high-tensile wire saw. But there was no time. "Yael, cover him!" Avner threw a heavy wool blanket from the cot over Nabil's head and torso. "Fire in the hole!" Avner triggered the detonator early. The explosion was deafening in the confined space. Dust and stone chips filled the air. The floor in the center of the room disintegrated, collapsing downward into the darkness of the sewer tunnel below. The door to the cell splintered inward at the same moment, blown off its hinges by the overpressure and the battering ram outside. Syrian soldiers flooded the room, firing blindly through the dust. "Down, go!" Avner grabbed Nabil by the waistband of his undergarments. With Yael's help, they dragged the semi-conscious man to the jagged hole in the floor. "Jump!" Yael went first, falling into the darkness. She landed with a splash in the muck below. "Clear!" she screamed up. Avner pushed Nabil over the edge. The man groaned as he fell, disappearing into the gloom. Avner fired 3 suppressing shots at the soldiers emerging through the dust, then vaulted into the hole himself. He hit the sewage water hard, rolling to absorb the impact. He scrambled up, wiping slime from his eyes. Yael was already dragging Nabil, whose ankles were still trailing lengths of chain and the broken remnants of the bolts that had been ripped from the wall by the sheer force of the floor collapsing near them, or perhaps the explosion had loosened the masonry enough for the anchors to pull free, a miracle of physics and luck. "Move! Move!" Avner shouted. Above them, flashlight beams cut through the hole. Automatic fire strafed the sewage water, sending geysers of filth into the air. They scrambled deeper into the tunnel, back the way they came. But Nabil was dead weight. He couldn't walk. His feet were mangled, his body broken. "We can't carry him fast enough," Yael gasped, struggling under Nabil's weight. "We have to." Avner gritted his teeth. "Eitan is at the output, 400 meters. They moved like mud-slicked demons through the underworld of Damascus. The adrenaline masked the exhaustion, but Avner knew they were running on borrowed time. The Syrians knew the layout of their own prison. They would be sending teams to intercept them at the sewer exits. "Stop," Nabil mumbled. "Leave me. You have the intel." "What intel?" Avner asked, not stopping. "The missiles," Nabil wheezed. "They aren't Scud bees. They are SS-21s, chemical warheads, already fueled." Avner froze for a microsecond. This changed everything. SS-21s were precision weapons. If they were tipped with chemical agents, they could wipe out Tel Aviv's command centers before Israel could launch a single jet. "You're telling the Prime Minister yourself," Avner said. "Keep moving." They reached the junction where the acid-burned grate lay. But as they turned the corner, they saw lights ahead. Not the soft glow of the moon at the exit, but the harsh white beams of military searchlights. "They blocked the exit," Yael whispered. "They're waiting for us," Avner said. Saraf is thorough. They were trapped, Syrians behind them in the tunnel, Syrians ahead at the exit. They were rats in a pipe. "Aitan," Avner whispered into his short-range radio. "Status." "Static." Then a voice, calm but tense. "I see them. 2 trucks. Heavy machine guns. They have the grate covered. I can't get close." "We are trapped inside," Avner said. "We need a diversion. Now." "I have the car," Aitan said. "It's a Mercedes sedan, loaded with extra fuel cans in the trunk." "Do it," Avner said. "See you in Jerusalem," Aitan replied. 30 seconds later, a massive explosion rocked the night outside. Aitan had driven the Mercedes at full speed into the blockade trucks and detonated the fuel. The concussion wave blew back into the tunnel, knocking Avner and Yael off their feet. The searchlights at the exit flickered and died. The shouting of the soldiers turned into screams of confusion. "Now!" Avner roared. They dragged Nabil through the smoking, twisted metal of the grate. The scene outside was chaos. Burning wreckage illuminated the night. Soldiers were scattered, some wounded, others firing wildly into the smoke. "Where is Aitan?" Yael screamed, scanning the burning wreck of the Mercedes. "Gone," Avner said, his voice hard. "He bought us the window. Take it." They dragged Nabil up the embankment towards a secondary alleyway where they had stashed a backup vehicle, a nondescript pickup truck used by local farmers. They threw Nabil into the bed of the truck and covered him with a tarp and baskets of vegetables. Yael jumped in the driver's seat. Avner hopped in the back with Nabil, his Makarov trained on the road behind them. The truck roared to life and sped away into the labyrinth of Damascus streets, leaving the burning fortress behind them. Chapter 9. The Needle. The drive to the safe house, a different one in the Druze quarter, was a blur of tension. Every police siren made them flinch. Every pair of headlights felt like the Mukhabarat. They pulled the truck into a small garage. Yael killed the engine. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the cost of the night. Aitan was dead. Nabil was broken. They carried Nabil into the house and laid him on a table. Avner ripped the tarp away. In the light of the kitchen, the extent of Nabil's injuries was horrifying. His wrists were raw meat. His ankles were swollen to the size of grapefruits. He was severely dehydrated. "Water," Nabil whispered. Yael brought a wet cloth and squeezed drops onto his lips. Slowly. "We need to get him across the border," Avner said. "He needs a hospital. He needs surgery." "We can't cross the border now," Yael said, pacing. "The whole country is on alert. They'll have checkpoints every 5 kilometers. "We can't stay here," Avner countered. "Saraf will tear the city apart looking for us. He knows we have the chemical intel now." Nabil grabbed Avner's wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong for a dying man. "The Golan," Nabil whispered. "There is a gap near Majd al-Shams, the minefield. I have the map." "A minefield crossing?" Yael asked skeptically. "It's the only way," Avner said. "They won't expect us to walk through a minefield. It's suicide." "It's not suicide," Nabil wheezed, tapping his temple. "If you know the pattern." Chapter 10. The Walk of Death. The Golan Heights at dawn is a place of stark, rugged beauty. The volcanic rock is black, the grass is green, and the wind is cold. It is also one of the most heavily mined places on Earth. 2 days later, Georgi the Bulgarian and his wife were gone. In their place were 3 shepherds moving slowly through the misty hills near the ceasefire line. Nabil was strapped to a makeshift stretcher made of branches and cloth. Avner and Yael carried him. They moved agonizingly slow. Left, 2 steps, Nabil whispered. He was reciting the minefield map from memory, a map he had memorized years ago as a logistics officer. Avner took 2 steps left. He probed the ground with a stick, solid. Forward, 10 paces. Stop at the white rock. They moved. Every step was a gamble. If Nabil's memory failed, if the rains had shifted the mines, they would be vaporized. They were 200 meters from the Israeli fence. They could see the patrol road. They could see the Star of David on a distant observation post. Halt! The shout came from behind them. Avner turned. 300 meters back, a Syrian patrol had spotted them. A jeep was bouncing over the rocks, a heavy machine gun mounted on the back. Run? Yael asked. No, Nabil said. Mines. If you run, you die. If we stay, they shoot us, Avner said. Walk, Nabil commanded. Walk exactly, where I say, faster. The Syrian jeep stopped at the edge of the minefield markers. The soldiers knew better than to drive in. They opened fire with the machine gun. Bullets kicked up dirt around them. Crack, thwack. Ignore them, Avner said, sweating despite the cold. Focus on the feet. They moved through the kill zone. The Syrians were firing indiscriminately, but the range was long and the terrain was uneven. 50 meters, Yael grunted, her muscles burning from the weight of the stretcher. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted 50 yards to their right. A stray Syrian bullet had detonated a mine. The blast knocked them to their knees. Up! Get up! Avner screamed. They scrambled the last few yards. They reached the barbed wire of the Alpha line. IDF! Don't shoot! Avner shouted in Hebrew, waving his white shirt. Israeli soldiers from the Golani Brigade emerged from the bunkers, weapons raised. They saw the 3 figures, one on a stretcher, emerging from the minefield. They saw the Syrian jeep firing from the ridge. The Israeli tank on the hill rotated its turret. One warning shot, a 105mm shell, slammed into the ridge above the Syrian jeep. The Syrians retreated instantly. Soldiers cut the wire. Avner and Yael collapsed onto Israeli soil, dragging Nabil with them. They were home. Chapter 11. The debrief. The hospital room in Tel Aviv was sterile, white, and quiet. It was a stark contrast to the dungeon in Damascus. Avner sat by the bed. Nabil was bandaged from head to toe. His recovery would take months, perhaps years. He would never walk properly again. But he was alive. The Prime Minister had visited an hour ago. The information about the chemical-tipped SS-21s had changed the strategic calculus. Israel had issued a private, stern ultimatum to Assad through American channels. The missiles were moved back. The threat was neutralized. You saved a lot of lives, Avner said softly. Nabil stared at the ceiling. I lost my country, Avner. I can never go back. I am a traitor to my uniform. You are a patriot to your people, Avner corrected. You stopped a war that would have burned Damascus to the ground. Nabil turned his head slowly. And Eitan? Avner looked down at his hands. He did his job. He is a hero of Israel. Does his family know? They will know he died serving the state. They will never know how or where. That is the life we chose. Nabil closed his eyes. The wall, he whispered. I still feel the wall behind me. Cold. Hard. It's gone, Avner said. You aren't there anymore. I will always be there, Nabil said. Part of me is still nailed to that stone. Months later, Avner stood on the promenade in Tel Aviv, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean. The sea was calm, indifferent to the wars of men. He thought about the janitor in Damascus, who had likely been executed. He thought about Eitan, burning in a Mercedes. He thought about Nabil, learning to walk on prosthetic supports in a safe house in Herzliya. The title of the operation file on his desk read simply, Extraction of Asset 83-1. It didn't mention the smell of the sewer, the crunch of the minefield, or the image of a man bolted to a wall like a medieval display. Intelligence work is often called the great game. But Avner knew the truth. It wasn't a game. It was a machine that ran on blood and silence. He lit a cigarette, shielding the flame from the wind. He had won this round. Mossad had stolen their man back from the devil himself. But as he looked north, towards the darkening horizon where Lebanon and Syria lay, he knew the machine was still hungry. The wall was waiting for the next man.